Almost a year ago, I was an opener at a resort, clocking in before 5 a.m. each day. The resort is located inside of an affluent neighborhood in a very wealthy town. Employees had to park in one of the 2 parking lots at either ends of the property, and I chose the lot that was adjacent to the long and windy road outside the resort, which led to the rest of the neighborhood. The road and the resort were separated by a short range of bush and trees that no one ever really walked through. I'd arrived one morning per usual and put the car into park with my headlights still on. The lights in the lot weren't ever on in the morning since no one else really showed up before 6 a.m. when the sun was out, so it was usually always dark at the start of my walk. Save for security, I was one of the first employees to arrive on the property each morning and was usually completely alone in this particular parking lot at this time. This morning didn't really seem any different. I had my hand literally at my keys, my brain in the process to turn off my car, when I noticed a young girl, maybe like 14 or 15 years old, come scampering through the span of the trees that separates the resort from the outside road. It's like her body language was the exact definition: run with quick, light steps, especially through fear or excitement. She was now directly in front of my car, and my headlights illuminated a clear view of her in the pitch black. She looked like she was in high school and had long blonde hair. She was wearing a jacket with pajamas maybe, like she had just walked outside of a house. One thing about her that bothered me though was that she wouldn't stop laughing and smiling. I couldn't hear her laughing from outside of the car, but she was visually giggling at something I wasn't aware of or could see, and it was so unnatural. She occasionally glanced behind her as if someone else were there waiting away from the headlights. She then waved at me like it was a normal gesture at this time, and then immediately ran to my passenger side door. This all happened in the matter of seconds, and I wasn't really sure what was even happening besides my anxiety spiking. I know that I simultaneously yanked the aux cord from my phone to shut off whatever song had been playing, while also grabbing for the lock button. I remember feeling that panic for never remembering if it's up or down to lock when the girl began pulling violently and incessantly on the door handle on the passenger side. I realized because I didn't turn my car off, it stayed locked. She began pounding on the window, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for her to leave before pressing on my horn. I could see her laughing outside like this was some type of game, as if I were her silly friend not letting her in as a joke. After a few seconds, she stopped the pounding and tried to open my car door. Her face fell flat like I disappointed her, and she started to walk away from my car back the way she came. She waved at me again before squeezing through the trees out of the view of my headlights. This whole encounter confused me as much as it did scare me. Most people I told the story just chalk it up to her being on drugs, but that narrative hasn't ever felt right to me despite her behavior. Maybe she was just being an extremely out-of-touch teenager whose parents need a firmer grip on her. My first thought was possibly human trafficking, but I'm not so sure that I would fit well in this scenario, as I'm not the most well-versed with the subject. I told someone when I made it to the LP, but they didn't seem to care that much. I didn't call the police, and I regret that. I'll never get out of my brain, though, how fucking off the feeling was watching a stranger, seemingly alone, pop out from the trees in the darkness laughing, and then try to violently enter your car in an empty parking lot. I do think that the possibility of someone else being present the whole time is a lot more scary, and I wonder who else was there, and where exactly. This story kind of creeped me out. It happened about 9 years ago and sometimes comes to my mind. So I was on an adult dating site, one of the fetish types. I know, don't judge me, I was just looking for some fun. Anyway, I was stupid and gave out more information than I should have. I was chatting with a guy, and he asked me at some point what I did for work. At the time I was working at McDonald's, so I told him. He asked which one, and I stupidly told him which one. I also stupidly gave him my phone number at some point. We chatted off and on, and we hadn't been chatting for too long. He would talk to me about how he wanted to meet me on break and have some fun. I told him no thanks. I don't bring my lifestyle to my job. Anyway, so I checked my messages just before I was due to clock out of work. Luckily I did. He mentioned that he was at my job and told me what he ordered. I think it was a Big Mac meal. I was like, okay, well, don't expect me to do anything with you. I'm not interested. He then got upset and wasn't accepting that I wasn't interested. I was also scared because I had sent him a face picture of myself, but I had never received one from him. I really wasn't too interested in him, so I decided I didn't need a face picture since I wasn't likely going to meet up with him. His interests weren't what I was looking for, and I have a hard time straight up saying I'm not interested, just slowly started to ghost whoever I had no interest in. Now, luckily, I hadn't told him my work schedule, so he didn't know I was about to clock out. So, after I was finished at work, I told one of my managers that I was on a dating site and some guy just showed up to my work and I have no idea what he looks like and that I was going to hang out in the back of the break room for a bit. Luckily, she didn't judge me and was just like, "Oh, okay." So I waited for about half an hour before I left. I didn't have a car at the time and had to walk home and was afraid he would see me and try to pick me up in his car. Luckily, no one followed me, so I was in the clear. So, creepy guy, let's never meet. I don't think he ever messaged me again, or I ended up blocking him or something. I don't really know if it's all that creepy, but it does creep me out that some random person just decided that he would show up at my job and expect me to want to meet up with him. So yeah, now I just give vague responses as to where I work now. I don't work in the same town I live in, so it would be hard to pinpoint my exact location. This opened my eyes and made me more aware of the information I give out to strangers. I had a stalker for over 10 years. This happened in the late 90s. I, Catherine, and my friend Rose met him together. My stalker was a guy Rose and I met on a bus one day coming home from my volunteer work after school. We were on the bus going home, laughing and talking as normal, and this guy just randomly sits by us and starts talking. He tells us his name and we laugh, thinking he said his name was Gay. Yeah, stupid teenage girls. He corrected us and said his name was Jay. We talked a bit more and innocently gave him our names, and he asked for our number, but I said no. He was like 7 years older and kinda strange the more we talked to him. He got annoyed, but whatever, right? So we thought that was that. A few days, maybe a week later, me and my same friend run into Jay while switching buses downtown. I was going to her house like I did a few times a week when we run into him. He asked for me to hang out and watch him play hockey that night. I said no, I was going to my friend's. He got weirdly annoyed and kept trying and badgering me, telling me about how much fun it would be and trying to get me away from my friend. He really didn't want her to come to this hockey game either, just wanted it to be us, me and him. So weird. Our bus finally came and we got out of there fast. Over the next few weeks I kept running into him downtown. It was like he knew my schedule, and every time I tried to be nice but get away as fast as I could, and every time he would get annoyed because I wouldn't hang out. A few weeks pass, and I'm in school, and in walks Jay. I was so mad and frustrated that I snapped on him. Why was he here and how did he know what school I went to? Did he follow me on the city bus? He tried saying that he was there to see his friends, but he wasn't with anyone. Just like some 25-year-old guy wandering around a high school? I doubt it. After that, I would randomly see him on my bus, and he would always try to sit across from me and watch. He would still ask for us to hang out, and I would still say no. As time went on, he would still find me on the bus and sit across from me with who I guessed was his girlfriend, or some girl he was trying to make me jealous with. He would look at me while making out with her. He would do everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. I would either turn up my music and do my best to ignore him, or move to another spot. Nothing ever seemed to deter him, though. He never did anything bad to call the police, but he knew it was wrong, and he knew it bothered me, and he knew I would have a panic attack, and I'm sure he got off on that. As the years went on, I would see less and less of him. He would randomly pop up and make me uncomfortable. He started standing really close to me and trying to talk. I would have a panic attack and do my best to ignore him. I would still walk away and would just get more pushy. Every time I would run into him, I would text my friend that was there when we first ran into him and get her to calm me down. It's now 2023, so 24-ish years since this all started, and I haven't seen him in at least maybe 8+ years, and I'm just praying that I never have to see him again. I'm 43 now, so he must be going on 50, but I'm still scared to run into him. I had thought that I had seen him a few times and panicked, but it ended up not being him. I just hope I never have to see him again. When I was about 9 or 10, I was invited to a classmate's birthday party at some swimming baths. All of us were about the same age. It was a small class of about 20 kids, and I'm pretty sure everyone was invited. Just to clarify, I'm a boy. Anyway, I kind of got separated from everyone, and it was just me and this girl alone. I wasn't particularly close friends with her, but I did know her as she was in my class. To describe the location we were in, it was in a tunnel that connected the main wave pool to a lazy river. There wasn't really anybody else there, just me and her, when suddenly she lunged at me without warning. She grabbed my head and held it underwater. I was a pretty skinny kid, and she was bigger than me and a bit of a tomboy. As about 20 seconds went by, I continued to furiously try and kick myself free, but she wasn't letting go. Fight or flight and mass panic took over, and I eventually fought my way free. I was coughing and spluttering water as I emerged. I remembered looking at her and being just in shock. I think I began to ask why she did that when she lunged at me again. She again held my head underwater for what felt like a lifetime before I finally fought my way free again. Both times I genuinely thought I was going to drown, and she didn't let up. I had to fight my way free. I couldn't swim at this time, but the water in the lazy river and tunnel was just about chest high. I began to backpedal away from her. She was giggling as if she thought it was funny, and had this kind of crazed look and grin on her face. I couldn't just climb out to escape, as it was a tunnel, so I had to try and get out of there. As I was backpedaling, she was following me, and I made sure to keep my distance so she didn't lunge again, but she was gaining on me. I actually managed to reason with her as I was so scared of her, I was babbling at her. I tried to distract her by suggesting we go down a water slide together. It worked as I could see her thinking about it, and she stopped chasing me. I managed to exit the tunnel and water, and she slowly followed me but seemed a bit unsure. I immediately felt more safe as I was out of the water and could see other people about as we headed towards the slides. I kept talking all the way up about how fun the slides were, etc., but she didn't really speak at all and had this really strange look on her face the full time. Anyway, after we went down the slides, I caught up with my friends and just stuck with them the rest of the time as I was a bit shook up. I never told the parents or my friends about it as I was a bit embarrassed to admit a girl had tried to drown me and was worried I'd get teased. Anyway, fast forward to adulthood, this girl turned out to be a lesbian. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but she got with her partner who had 2 or 3 kids from her previous relationship with a guy. It turns out that they would torture the kids together and eventually they killed one of them. She is currently serving a life sentence in prison. I told my friends about the swimming pool incident after hearing about her crimes, and I'm pretty sure they think I was just bullshitting as none of them took me seriously. Maybe it was because I kind of lightheartedly said I was almost her victim number 1. However, nonetheless, it is a bit crazy to think back, as she obviously was a genuine psychopath. And if I had never fought her off of me to try and escape, and then convinced her to go down the slide, I genuinely believe that she could have killed me. Okay, so bear with me. This happened when I was a kid, and I double-checked the story with my family. So, this was in the mid-80s. I was about 7 at home with 2 of my older sisters, 8 and 11, and 2 cousins, 7 and 8-ish, all 5 girls. My sister, the 11-year-old, was in charge of babysitting us 4 younger girls. You have to picture what our house looked like to understand what happened. It was a 2-story box house with a flat roof and a small box front porch, also with a flat roof. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were all in the house. We kept hearing noises coming from the roof, like walking, and what sounded like rocks being dropped down the drain spouts. You know kids, we thought of a squirrel or something, but it kept happening. Then my older sister said something about how maybe someone climbed the huge tree beside the house and got onto the roof. We all ended up being scared because of what she said, and we knew that there was some roof access point in the bedroom that I shared with one of my sisters. What if he could get inside? My oldest sister told my other sister and one of our cousins to walk across the street to the corner store, across an empty gravel parking lot, and on the way back, look up and if they could see someone on the roof. So the girls walk halfway across the parking lot and being curious kids turned around, looked up and saw a guy in one of those totally 80s guys crop top football jerseys. Think like Johnny Depp in A Nightmare on Elm Street. He was crouched down on the roof. The girls came running home freaking out and told my older sister about the guy. My older sister, now freaking out too, first went to the neighbor's house to use their deck to see if she could see on the roof, but she couldn't see anything. She came home and then called the police. It felt like it took them ages to show up. When they got there, I don't think they believed a word we said. They thought a bunch of little kids are making up this story for attention. One cop drove down the road, up a hill about a block away to see if they could see anything, but the way the roof was, you couldn't see a person if they were laying. Then the cops tell us kids that we had to go upstairs and check everywhere to see if we found anyone. 5 little girls from the ages 7 to 11 sent upstairs, scared shitless, crying to look for this man, knowing about the roof access, and all crying not wanting to go, but they said we had to. To this day, I remembered how scared I was. I remember looking, but how well do little kids look, right? The cops didn't listen to us. didn't check out the house, inside or out, and just left. We were so scared to be left home with the guy out there, who knows where. We didn't know if he was just laying down on the roof or jumped down or somehow got in and was hiding. My mom finally got home a few hours later, and we told her what happened, and my mom explained to us that there was a lock on the roof access and no one could get in, but she checked anyways. Then went to check outside. There were clear footprints in the dirt, dug in good from him jumping off onto the porch and off into the lower flower bed. Oh, my mom was so steaming mad when she realized we told the truth and weren't believed by the police. We went to the police station the next day and we were all separated and interviewed. We all told the same story. My mom went up on one side of the cops and down the other. We never found out who the guy was or why he was there. Did he know it was a house with 5 little girls home alone? Probably. This happened years ago when I was barely 14. My middle school and the middle school of my best friend at the time organized a trip abroad to Great Britain, London to be exact. It was supposed to be a few days looking at London attractions, museums, and shops. It was fun, until it wasn't. For the day we were supposed to leave and go home, we were brought to some streets with some interesting shops, and we received free time for shopping. Then, our teachers and guide had a brilliant idea. They told us that after the time for shopping ends, we have to meet at a different street than this. In retrospect, it was only 100 meters away, but they still shouldn't do something like that. Most of us have never been to London. We barely speak English, we don't have a map to the city, roaming services don't work correctly. It was just a bad idea. 90% of the students got lost. I got lost with my best friend because we went in a complete opposite direction. We were both confused about the directions we were given. We were walking along pavement and my friend was running ahead, and I was staying behind, too nervous to look around. We didn't look like we were together, because we were not interacting with each other. I guess that's why this happened. Like I said, my friend ran ahead and stopped to look around when I saw a black car approach me and match my speed. I started to feel like this was a scene from a movie. It was broad daylight and there was a lot of people around and no one reacted. I was confused and didn't know what was happening. Then from a car stepped a man and said, "You're nice, come with me," and then tried to grab me. The car was still running, so I suppose someone was still in it. I was stunned. I did not believe it was real. At that moment, my friend ran to me from behind, grabbed me and dragged me away. We ran and tried to lose tail of the man or the car because it followed us. After some time, we stopped and my friend nervously cried, shaking me and screaming why I didn't move when the man tried to catch me. I explained my deer in headlights moment. We cooled down and managed to ask some people for help, and we finally were found by our teachers. We didn't tell anyone what had happened, as we were sure no one would believe us. After that, when we got back, I told my parents, and I never went on a trip organized by that school again. My mom considered all of that really unprofessional and irresponsible. I've changed some small details here and used a throwaway because I don't want this to ever get traced back to me. When this took place, I was a female in my 20s and was finishing my degree in the city, working as a casual receptionist at a firm. One of the employees, Nick, told me one day that one of his clients, who he said was a stand-up guy, thought I was very cute and wanted to see if I would be okay to give him my number. We went to dinner and he was charming enough. He was in the medical field and was about 7 years older, but I didn't mind as my own parents had a similar age gap between them. We talked about my studies and he told me that he thought my rather run-of-the-mill family life was amazing because his life was so different. He was adopted as a baby and his father was abusive. When he was 15, his mother left and he never saw her again after that. He was kicked out at 18 and ended up in a terrible car accident in his early 20s. For a long time, he stayed at a relative's house and worked to support himself. Yeah, heavy conversation on the first date, but all I felt was this overwhelming compassion for this poor human who had been through so much. He seemed nice, was smart, handsome, and though he was just a touch too serious, given his life, I figured that was understandable. We ended up dating, but by about the 3rd week, things started to feel a bit weird. He refused to introduce me to any of his friends because his last ex had left him for a friend. He also hated that I had male friends because of the same reason, and he would insist on reading any of the text I received or sent to them. I made excuses in my head for him like, people need to heal, or sometimes they need a crutch before they learn to trust again, or, well, it's not like I have anything to hide. He started being critical of the way I spoke or acted and dressed. He was also super insistent we moved in together, but I felt that it was way too soon. In arguments, sometimes, he would get a weird look in his eye, and that made me feel unsettled. And I once tried to break the tension by half joking, "You look like you want to hit me," to which he responded, "I wouldn't bother if it came to that, I would just kill you." I was so shocked I didn't even react to that until days later. Recounting it, red flags everywhere, but though it might have been hard to believe, I was actually convinced I was falling in love with him. Most of the time he was perfect, until he wasn't. But he would explain that was only because he had so many issues from his past, and I would believe him. Then one day, I told him what I thought was a funny story about a random guy in class who asked for my number. This guy had asked under the guise of getting notes for class he'd missed, but I only offered my college email address, explaining that I had a boyfriend. Hilariously, as soon as the class ended, I saw this guy annoyedly throwing the paper I wrote my email on in the bin on his way out of the lecture hall. I expected my boyfriend to laugh, but he ended up losing it. He accused me of leading the guy on, accused me of wanting to cheat. I was furious because I knew I had done nothing wrong. When he angrily threw a mug at the wall, which shattered, the whole argument came to an abrupt halt. I was scared and angry, so I grabbed my bag and bolted out of his apartment. I thought he would stop me, but he didn't. I went home and cried about it to my cousin, who I was living with, and assumed it was over. Days passed and I hear nothing from him, and within those days I started questioning everything. Suddenly, it was clear as day that this relationship was toxic and very unhealthy. Even if he did have a tough past, it wasn't my job to fix it, and it wasn't an excuse for the way he treated me. I was starting to accept that this was just a horrible near miss and get over it when he texted me again, groveling apologies and how much he missed me, and I made the mistake of responding. He called and I picked up, but it was because I wanted to tell him I still thought it wasn't going to work out. He cried, yelled at me, asked me how I could do this to him when I knew that everyone he loved in his life had abandoned him before, and how could I do the same? He told me he would never be able to love again and that it was all my fault. I had broken him. He told me that he had given me everything, but I was leaving over such a small argument. Then he apologized and told me he was trying to change and to give him another chance. I was bawling my eyes out. I felt like the worst human in the world, but I held tight to saying that it was best we moved on and that I was sorry. He ended the call by telling me that I had ruined his life. Nothing happened for a while, except for texts here and there where he would apologize, tell me he missed me, explain that he had realized that he made so many mistakes, etc., etc. I would tell my cousin about him, and she would firmly tell me not to respond. She was sure it would stop eventually. One day I finished my work as usual and headed to the station. It was a busy day and the streets were scattered with other people. As I walked, I had a weird urge to turn and look behind me, and when I did, I saw my ex. There was a little distance between me and him, but when I saw him, our eyes locked. He looked different, a bit out of it, and I thought maybe he was drunk. I decided that I would deal with him at the train station, as it was always crowded, and I wanted to talk to him only in a place where there were lots of people. I figured the yelling and crying would not be as intense that way. When I reached the station, I stopped and waited for him to catch up to me. He stopped about 2 feet away, and I expected him to start apologizing again. But he said nothing. He just stared at me. Awkward seconds pass and pass, and I said, "Look." But that's all I got out because his arm moved slightly as he took his hand half out of his pocket, and I saw he was holding a very small knife. I froze and vaguely remembered thinking that I wanted to run, but it was like my brain and body shut down. I can only describe it as if there was a fog in my brain, and I just couldn't move for what felt like ages. I just stared at him, and I still remember how his eyes just looked so blank. I don't know how long that lasted, but then without saying anything, he turned and left. Nobody else had noticed. I remember numbly getting on the train. I started second-guessing that it even happened. Hindsight tells me I was in shock. As soon as I got home, though, I burst into tears. My cousin calmed me down and helped me call the police. In the end, the security cameras weren't placed in a spot that they could clearly show that he had a weapon, so the police couldn't do much. Thankfully, I didn't see my ex again. I ended up quitting my job, changing my number, and eventually moved away to another city. To my ex, let's never ever meet again. Actually, to the guy who asked for my number in class, thank you. You might have saved my life, and definitely changed it. I was in my first semester of university. I had just graduated college not too long ago and had entered into a program that after a while I would come to resent. During that time with adjusting and taking daily transit an hour and a half away from where I grew up into the big city in order to study was somewhat of a new adventure to me. In a lot of ways, I was just beginning to sprout as my own individual and trying to carve a path of my life when simultaneously opening up myself to new experiences and a new environment. I have longtime friends who go to the same facility as me, but all the time our schedules wouldn't always line up. This meant that a lot of my days were spent traveling back and forth and walking around the city alone. I really wanted to try and expand my horizon of experiences and friends during this period. In a lot of ways, I was really desiring to find a good community on campus that could help me satiate my boredom and loneliness. I can be extremely extroverted, but sometimes I find it takes a lot of me to try and actually pursue and maintain friendships that haven't been established years prior. I've made friends before from different classes in college, but ultimately, and I know this makes me an asshole, but I would end up texting them less and less until eventually either side would end up ghosting one or the other. Because I'm a busy guy, I don't find myself prioritizing people who I feel like aren't as important to me as others. I know, a shitty thing to say, but nonetheless the truth. One day, however, I met Joel. I was on the phone with my fiancé, and I distinctly remember exactly how it all went down. As I was walking out of the school's Starbucks with a decaf coffee, I had one headphone in, and I was heading to class through a small stretch of underground passageway under the street that connects the school's library building to the actual building that possesses classes. As I was hastily making my way, I saw this short and stout guy, looking roughly my age at the time, which was 21. He had a thick brown beard and a hat on. Our eyes met, and as I was about to simply walk past, he asked me something in a very charismatic and calm tone. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You look like a pretty busy guy, but I was wondering, do you mind doing a survey about religion? It's for one of my classes." To this, I regret answering and wish I had simply continued walking, but at the time, I was becoming more and more compelled by the notion of formal religious institutions and questioning my own religious faith, particularly leaning towards Christianity. "Sure," I replied. He then introduced himself as Joel, and after we went through a small survey pertaining to religious affiliations and perspectives on religions, Joel informed me that a small group of students like himself were planning on getting together as a group and discussing various religions in order to gather new insights and to create a community. Of course, with the prospect of finding some new friends on campus and also exploring my own spiritual perspectives, I gave him my phone number after he asked for it. He said that he would contact me in the next following days. Upon entering our first meeting, I sat down in a very crowded place with seats at our school facility and was greeted by Joel, alongside a bunch of other members. They introduced themselves to me and vice versa, and they were all extremely kind to me. We began our small group meeting, and I was a bit shocked to find out that the sole topic that they were going to discuss was Christianity. I wasn't aware that we were only going to be discussing Christianity, which is against what he had initially proposed this group to constitute upon our meeting in the tunnel. That being said, I was still curious enough to continue, and I was accompanied by 3 other young guys of my age, who after a bit of talking with, I found out we had a lot of similar interests. Joel, who now presented himself as the leader of our study group, relayed how we would be analyzing Christianity through a multi-step program designed to unveil the holy power associated with the religion to us. Since I was curious and wanted to learn more about the religion as well as having made some newfound friends, I continued to attend this, quote, study group for the rest of the semester, in which there were a few circumstances where I questioned Joel's interpretations and was met with hard resistance. It felt like at times my wavering belief in what Joel was saying would be met with straight dismissal as opposed to actual conversation. I continued to brush that off as the group that I was working with got closer. The school's club, which I was now an official part of, provided me with exactly what I had wanted. We even went to a church-run event together where I quit vaping and many individuals reported mystical experiences. Things only started to get concerning with Joel during one of our one-on-one conversations. I discussed my personal experiences and belief in my newfound religious beliefs and all of my former spiritual experiences as well, and Joel exposed me to a story and a few incidents that at the time I certainly should have taken as red flags. For example, when he was younger, he had gone on a retreat where when he was in prayer, he said that he began to hear the voice of God talk to him. I questioned at first if he was referring to the voice of God as more of a metaphor, but he reassured me that he literally heard God speak to him before. When he told me this, I became a bit unnerved, At the helm of this community was Joel, but in all other senses I was satisfied with who I was and what we were doing together. Though I'm not entirely dismissive of strange occurrences, especially pertaining to spirituality, his experience of talking with God in his head came off as uncomfortable to me. He also said that the way that he would pray would involve a direct conversation and reply with God. Out of discomfort, I wouldn't prod him on what that really meant. This, of course, was just the beginning. After the summer had ended, I found myself in the most religiously devoted state I had ever been in. Throughout the summer, I had had a treacherous injury which left me housebound for months and to call upon God in a lot of ways for strength. With my newfound devotion, I was elated to fall back into the community that I had nurtured and grown with throughout the last semester, relating to something that I had found deep joy in. At the first lesson of the semester, something was very different. Joel, as before, was at the helm of our study session, but was now perpetually interrupted by people coming to greet him and give him praise. It was so bad that we literally essentially sat and watched for 20 minutes before we can get on with our lesson as more than 10 people, mostly young men of our age, came to greet this man. As aforementioned, when not unnerving, he was extremely charming and gave the impression that he cared deeply for everyone. Once our lesson began, he introduced us to the second phase of the program. He explained to us that this was one of the toughest programs of the different levels that there were, as it required even more devotion and, more importantly, an emphasis on sacrifice for those who engaged. He showed us a diagram of a small stick person, and he showed that in this program we would have to accept Jesus as the center of our life. He explained that by making our lives surround Jesus entirely, that we would not be losing something, but be gaining it. He also began to go over the notion that sex before marriage is a sin, and that if we were to continue with this program, we would have to make the sacrifice of giving up sex in our relationships and prove that we weren't. He said that many guys weren't able to continue because of it. I talked about this afterwards with one of the members of the group, who, not unlike me, had been in a serious relationship with someone they loved for years. In my personal opinion, though we weren't married on the altar, I knew that both me and this other member felt devoted to our partners as if we were already married in a sense, and we both expressed how Joel's behavior surrounding this was off-putting, controlling, and intrusive. After our lesson, I was a bit dumbfounded by the intensity of which he gave his speech about the new program that we would be engaging in this semester. Joel and I sat down for a few more minutes and talked, in which I expressed experiences of devotion from the summer and explained my entire catastrophic experience with my injury. He then went on to tell me that at times, he was actually able to know things beforehand. This seemingly random and strange statement shocked me. He said, for example, he was able to know something another member had before they even mentioned it, and in the way that he described it, it sounded like he was saying he had some form of mystical foresight. I was a bit jarred to say the least, though. I felt like it would be impolite to question any further. Joel then went on to tell me that he believed that I, if successfully completed this program, was primed to become a teacher for the first program I had done the semester prior, leading others who would join, and that I had a bright future in the organization. In that moment, with what he had laid down on us in that last lesson, I felt very overwhelmed by his expectations of me. It also became very evident that Joel was not a student at our facility. In fact, he was in his mid-30s and had kids. He was actually just a part of an organization that recruits people to become Christians and missionaries that work on our campus. This means that he actually lied to me when I first met him. He wasn't a student. There was no group talking about various religions, and his whole purpose was to convert me to make me join the organization he was a part of. At this point, school began to pick up a lot, and I was working part-time to help support myself. As I was on the train to head back home the next week, I had forgotten that my second lesson of the program that semester was supposed to happen, so I texted Joel saying, "Hey man, I actually got onto the train and forgot about our lesson. Sorry about that, dude. I'm not going to be able to make it. I also have work later." To which he replied, "Can you get off the train? Try and get here as soon as possible." I was a bit dumbfounded at this question. Since I live an hour and a half away, it wasn't as easy as getting off the train and heading back the opposite direction, and he knew that. He knew that the area that I lived in was remote and a long distance away. I also told him that I had work, which he had plainly disregarded. "No man, unfortunately I can't come. Have a good lesson," I replied, to which he again said, "Come on man, just get off the train and come back." At this point I was annoyed. Not only did I feel like he was commanding me, but that he was also blatantly disregarding the fact that I said no and that I had work that day. I didn't answer him. I talked with my fiancé about how I was starting to feel about the whole ordeal, and how I felt guilty about having feelings of wanting to distance myself from the group, while simultaneously not wanting to lose the community and friends that I had established along the way. My fiancée told me that by the way that Joel was acting, and with regards to the things that he was saying, she was starting to become uncomfortable with the whole situation. I remember sitting in bed thinking about leaving the group and how the prospect made me feel physically ill. After all, I had been given everything I wanted in the community, except at the helm, which was from a person that was seemingly increasingly controlling and persuasive, and was making me and possibly other members feel more miserable. There was an event the following Friday that was going to be at the church, which was organized by the community. Originally, since many of my friends from the group were going, I intended to go, but alas, I was scheduled by my boss to work that day, so there was no way I was going to be able to attend. I knew that Joel would be insistent upon me coming anyway, so when Joel texted me reminding me that the event was Friday, I told him that I wasn't going to be able to go because I had work. To this he replied and simply said, "What? Bro, no way, you've gotta come. Take work off and find somebody to take your shift. God wants you here." I was expected. He dismissed my decision and also said that I had to be there because God wanted me there, as if he was his mouthpiece. I went on to text him again and inform him, "No, sorry man, I can't do that. I just got a promotion and I have to be there. I hope you guys have a great time anyway," to which he then again replied similarly to what he had before. This was my personal breaking point. He knew the importance of my financial situation, and his dismissal of my personal boundaries, as well as his commanding, made me decide to text him explaining that I was done with the group and that I wanted to pursue my own religious exploration without the group from then on. I felt as if he slowly but surely increasingly controlled me and was trying to take what he could, commanding me as if he was the leader of my life in any way possible. It was even up to him if I could fuck my fiancée or not. He replied with a long paragraph persisting in this sort of overly kind manner that I had to continue with the group and that it was God's will for me to show up to the event even though I was completely unable to. He was certain that this group was meant for me and that God had told him that this was where I was supposed to be. After I responded again telling him to stop and that I would not, he sent me another paragraph of similar length repeating what he would say. No matter what I would say and whenever I would say no, he would overstep my boundaries while maintaining a kind and friendly tone in order to try and push me into submission when I clearly said no. At this point I said I did not want him to talk to me anymore, to which he replied, "Bro, why? Can we meet up? I want you to explain why you don't want to continue, so can we meet up and do that? I can get a better sense and we can try to figure out what we do from here." Even in this, I knew he was trying to elongate his chance at bringing me back into the group and continuing his reign of control. I said I didn't want to, so he asked again. I decided at that moment that I needed to block him, so I did. A semester later, I was walking down the street of my school, and as I walked by a pizza parlor, lo and behold, who came out? Joel walked over to me with one of his friends and said that I was one of his friends to his buddy. I uncomfortably stood there, and his friend went inside for a moment while Joel turned around to look at me and asked with his disarming gentleness, "Did you block me?" I replied yes. He then said, "You should unblock me. That way we can meet up and talk because I really want to know why you left the group." To which I was evidently frustrated, said okay, and went on my way. That night he texted me on my Instagram insisting we meet up again, and I blocked him there too. In short, I'm thankful for my fiancée who is the love of my life. Without her, I'm not sure I would have been strong enough to leave the group and his control. The fact of the matter is that there were other guys in the group who had absolutely nobody. They had nothing, and they were prime targets for this charismatic and controlling freak. There were members of that group who were in higher levels, so to speak, who had done all the programs and who seemed as if they were emaciated. But they had become such restricted fundamentalists that their lives and their openness to new experiences were significantly thwarted. Beware of who you let into your life, and just because somebody is nice to you doesn't mean that they might not have ulterior motives. Also, learn to stand your ground and respect yourself. If you say no, mean it. So Joel, you controlling cult leader, let's not meet again.